Welcome everybody to the City Rev Life podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Agosto, and with me is Marsha Wagner. Thank you for being here, Marsha.
So excited.
So excited. Guys, we are continuing our series called Back to School, where we want to help provide insight, some tips, some wisdom on how to help parents navigate through the school year. Last episode, we were talking a lot about how to just build healthy habits and routines when it comes to preparing to getting back into school. In this episode, we're going to be going more in depth, addressing the emotional and social needs of our children and how to navigate through that. Because like we talked about in the last episode, there can be the jitters, the anticipation, the excitement, and also the stress.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say to that, Marsha, as far as recognizing stress in our children and how to deal with it?
So I'll start off by saying that not all stress is bad.
Yeah.
Stress really helps us get tasks done. And so it's really about finding a way to make stress helpful and not hurtful in your child's life. And some of the signs that a child is stressed, there, are your classic headaches and stomach aches, right? When there are repetitive calls from school that your child has a stomach ache and then they get home and all is well, that's a classic sign. But then there's others like maybe biting their nails or unstable moods. So one minute they're happy, the next minute they're really not. Also, a loss of motivation can often be a signal of stress. And sleep patterns. So either your child is having a hard time falling asleep, or they do fall asleep at their bedtime, but then they have a hard time staying asleep. That could also be another signal of stress. And then withdrawal is also another one where, whether the child is withdrawing from an activity or a social group or from the family. And poor diet is another one that comes to mind. So either eating too much or eating too little could also be a sign of stress.
So what I'm hearing is more so recognizing when the symptoms of stress are surfacing from the child. Now, how do you help them cope with the stress?
So building resiliency is definitely going to help them cope with stress. And there's a variety of ways that children can build resiliency and coping skills, one of them being spirituality. So reading the Bible is always what helps me as an adult.
Yeah.
I know that when I'm stressed and feeling down and defeated, the Bible is where I go to. Serving others is very helpful. Daily devotionals is also very helpful. A prayer journal is also helpful, and that helps in two ways. It helps you track back to, wow, God really answered that, or I'm still praying about this. And it also helps you set gratitude, right? It helps the child to look back and be grateful for the things that have occurred in their life spiritually. And another way that we can build resiliency is through social supports. So having a conversation with your child about what their current social supports are. So maybe mom, dad, grandma, a friend, a pastor at church, but also having a conversation about potential social support. So maybe a school counselor or their new classroom teacher, and having that conversation with them. Optimism is also another way to help students with stress. Having them, as we said before, with the prayer journal, completing a positive journal every single day. Have your child write down 3 positive things that happened in the day. And it can be as small as, we hit green lights on the way to school today and didn't have a single red light, to my friend and I sat down and we talked and we ironed out the problems that we were having, right? So it can be big and small, but every day have them write down 3 things that they're grateful for in a journal. And last, I would just suggest adaptability. As parents, we can help cognitively restructure situations for our children. A lot of times the stress comes from forecasting ahead all the what ifs and what might happen. And so as parents, we can help our children understand that the stress might be irrational sometimes, and it might not even be a reality right now. It might just be something that the child is forecasting might happen, and we can help restructure that for them.
Yeah, and while these are all very, very, very good resources and good tools to implement, it doesn't happen overnight.
You're absolutely right, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Just like any other skill, it takes time to develop new behaviors. And the research shows that new behaviors have to be repeated an average of 8 times in order for it to really be embedded in a child. And that's just for a new behavior. If you're replacing an old behavior with a new behavior, research says it takes an average of 28 times. So when a parent says, how many times do I need to tell you to X? An average of 28 times.
Wow. So I know how we were talking about when it comes to coping with the stress, social support is extremely important. Having healthy friendships kind of backing you up and supporting you, it plays a huge role in coping and getting through the stress. If you could, how would you define a healthy friendship? How can you cultivate, I guess, a healthy friendship?
So I really want to commend you for using the terminology healthy friendship. I think sometimes as parents, we can use the terminology of deserving a friend, or you don't deserve that. And that kind of puts our children in a space of entitlement, where when you phrase it in terms of a healthy relationship, it seems like a nuance, but it's really framing it in more of a biblical context, because throughout the Bible, God shows us what a healthy friendship looks like. And so my go-to is always utilizing the Bible. That's God's instruction manual for us. And so go back into the Bible, look at all of the examples of friendship within the Bible, and use that as a conversation starter about the kinds of characteristics that are important to have in a healthy relationship.
Yeah, I mean, especially going through elementary school, middle school, high school, friends are huge.
Yes.
Having friends, it's big. And with that comes a lot of influence. And I know it's a little bit of a taboo topic, but still something to address: peer pressure.
Yes.
You mind speaking into that?
Sure. So I saw this video on YouTube once. It was a social conformity experiment waiting room video. And it's a mouthful to say that they had a subject come into a doctor's office, and she's thinking she's going to see the doctor. And all of the patients waiting in the waiting room were in the know for the experiment. And so they were instructed to stand up every time they heard the tone over the PA system. So the subject walks in, she takes a seat. They hear the tone, they all stand up. She kind of looks around like, what's happening here? Why is everyone standing up? Second time, the tone, same thing, they all stand up. By the third tone, she's now standing up with them. Doesn't know why, but she's standing up. And so the experiment continues. They then take all those individuals that are part of the experiment and know what's going on out of the waiting room to go see the doctor. And she's by herself now in the waiting room. And the experiment is she going to continue to stand when she hears the tone? And the answer is yes, she does. And then the third part of the experiment is that they bring in individuals, other subjects who don't know what's going on. They bring them in and they want to see what their behavior is when she stands up at the sound of the tone. And so beep, there it goes. And she stands up and the guy kind of looks at her a little weird. And then it goes off again and she stands up and he leans over and says, why are you standing up? And she says, I don't really know, but the people before were doing it. And so fast forward, they eventually fill up the waiting room again with all subjects to the experiment. And eventually every last adult in this experiment stands up when they hear the beep. And they don't know why, right? And so when I saw that video, it automatically made me think of my children. And it made me think of the implications that have for them in terms of peer pressure, right?
Yeah.
Because this experiment just reveals what our human behavior is like. We are programmed to be part of a group, we're programmed to belong. And clearly, you have grown adults that are doing things for reasons they don't even know and can't explain.
Yeah.
And so, if that's happening to adults, imagine our children.
Yeah.
And that is where you really start to realize the importance of the friends that are surrounding your child, right? Because whatever is normal in that friend group will eventually become normal for your child.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to become the beep in the room that they will automatically start to stand up and do because they're seeing their peers do the same.
Yeah.
And it might not make sense to them. And you might sit with them and say, we've raised you better than this and you know better than that. But again, going back to the experiment, the grown woman says, I don't know why I'm doing it. Everyone else was just doing it. So I thought it's the right thing to do. So it's extremely important to ensure that you're connected with your child's friends, that you know something about your child's friends, and that you're having conversations about your child's friends. In episode 1, we talked about having that conversation about who did you play with at recess, or who did you sit with at lunch, and what kind of conversations with you did you have, right? As you're having those conversations, you're understanding what the social norm is in your child's friend group.
Yeah. I mean, having that open communication is so vital. And it's funny because just like in the video, like she didn't know why she was doing it. It was only because everybody else was.
Right.
So it's based on the majority following suit.
Absolutely.
Oh, I can, I mean, if it's okay for them, then it's okay for me.
Right.
And I think what's important to be aware of, that I don't think a lot of children think of in the moment, is the consequences of the actions.
Absolutely.
So do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, so I think that we need to teach our children early on that all of our actions have consequences, right? Yeah. And sometimes our children think that because an adult isn't aware of their actions, that there isn't a consequence. But there could be a consequence. Maybe it's just coming down the road for them. And even bigger than that is the conversation of integrity. And having that conversation with your child about, we as Christians are called to do better and understand that we are answering to God. So it's not about the adult that's watching or providing a consequence, but that we will ultimately one day have to answer to God about what we did on this earth.
Yeah, that's so important. So to kind of monitor our children's social interactions, are there any resources that parents can kind of pull out from or look into?
Smartsocial.com is one of my favorites. I encourage parents to click on the tab that says resources. In there, you'll find the meanings of emojis when they're used in sequence with one another and what they actually mean. It also helps parents understand what the acronyms mean. One of my favorites that I saw on there was POS. You know, in my generation, that meant something very different than what it means now. So now the acronym POS is parent over shoulder. So if your child is texting that, then it's signaling that they're talking about something that they don't want you to be privy to. So I find that all very helpful. And they also have, as part of their resources, software that you can look into as a parent to purchase to monitor your child's cell phone as well. So just lots of resources in there that are very helpful.
So tackling emotional support for our children. What about, are there any like faith-based approaches that you would say that parents should take?
I think seeking counsel is definitely very important. And there was a whole podcast on that that Pastor Roby did. And so finding a faith-based therapist is extremely important. If that's the appropriate approach for your child at that time if that's what they need. And then also the Bible app. You know,
Yeah.
we all use the Bible app to read our Bible from, but they have this great little button down at the bottom that says plans.
Yeah.
And there are plans for everything in there. I know that my child has talked to me about some topics, and my husband, and we kind of look at each other like, oh, how are we even going to broach this topic? And so our go-to are the resources in the plans there. And we find plans that we can work through together as a family that, again, are biblically based and just produce great conversation surrounding that specific topic.
I think that's awesome. And just kind of like what we've been talking about already, like when it comes to emotional support, recognizing it and coping with the stress, as you were talking about, are very important things to include. So thank you so much, Marsha, for being part of this episode. Thank you for sharing. Guys, please share this episode with your friends, with your family. We'll see you back on the next episode of the City Rev Life podcast.
Thank you so much for listening to the City Rev Life podcast. Feel free to subscribe and leave a rate and review. We love it when you share it with your friends on social media, so don't forget to tag us at cityrev.church. If you're interested in more resources, download our City Rev Church app and follow us on social media. Have a great day.